Okay, today I'm going to be discussing nationalism. I'm going to try and provide you with an argument that it is in some respects a good thing. And I'm going to tell you a bit about my thoughts on the subject of nationalism. So before you rate this video down and think, oh my word, Nick has turned into an evil Nazi bastard, just stop, relax, remember to breathe, and remember a video is much more than just its title or indeed the first few words which are said within the first few seconds of the video. You got to think about the content, maybe even the information section if the video actually has an information section, and of course any other messages which are associated with what the speaker in question is talking about. This is part of a series of videos that I'm doing which I call The Experiment, in which I look at ideas that which we traditionally regard as being somehow a little bit difficult or a little bit inappropriate somehow, and we try and find the positives within them if there are any. And then we try and work out, as a result of the discussion of the ideas, whether the concept in question is more towards the positive or more towards the negative. Now we're looking at another subject which has traditionally been riddled with meanings. We tend to think of the word nationalism and associate that with National Socialism or Nazism, directly Nazism. Possibly even ethnic nationalism, such as white supremacy or the supremacy of one particular ethnic group above another, or the views that one particular ethnic group is superior to another, when in fact it might not be. We connect the word nationalism often with far-right ideologies, often with groups which are against, let's say, immigration, and a wide variety of other issues which we can, if we are genuinely a liberal people or democratic people, might have an issue with. Also, traditionally speaking, we may look at nationalism and think to ourselves, this is some way in which the populace are controlled by the ruling classes. So obviously a wide combination of negative associations with the word nationalism. Now, let's just try and look at this objectively. All right, let's just say that the word isn't nationalism. Let's say the word is Wurklugluftemu. All right, a word you've never heard of before, but you know how to spell it for some kind of irrational reason. Rather like the word merkin in that particular respect, but never mind. Okay, we're on dictionary.com. I've got the definition of nationalism in front of me, and I'm just going to go through a few things and tell you some of my thoughts about the various definitions which are here, and basically what that seems to imply. The first definition it gives is spirit or aspirations common to the whole of a nation. So common would mean probably views of the majority. So within Britain today, we would say that democracy is in fact something common to the whole of the nation. And in participating in democracy, we're actually doing something which is part of nationalism. It is part of our nationalism as British people to go and vote, to feel that we can have a certain quantity of freedom of speech and a certain quantity of freedom of movement and freedom of religion. So essentially these things are part of the spirit of which are common to the whole of the nation. Alright, so in that particular respect, if we believe in democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of religion, we are essentially British nationalists, whether we like it or not. We are not necessarily associated with British nationalist groups, but we are essentially fulfilling British nationalism, essentially. The second stage, the second definition says, devotion and loyalty to one's own country, semicolon, patriotism. This is where it gets a little bit more murky, because devotion and loyalty, what precisely does that mean? If Britain was to go to war, would I personally be called up? Would I have the opportunity to volunteer? Well, if I was younger and fitter, then maybe I would volunteer to help to do my bit to protect the nation. But there's other ways in which you can do your bit for the nation, isn't there? You can participate in various social movements, you can participate in charitable movements, or indeed you can give money to the Poppy Appeal, which is there to support the soldiers who've now left the services and are now, quite happily enjoying drinking at the British Legion or whatever. Okay, or indeed those who are damaged or injured or have lost a leg in various wars and still need medical support, so we can then therefore pay the medical support to the soldiers who've come back home. That is a form of doing your part, and therefore would cover the subjects of devotion and loyalty to one's own country. It would therefore be a patriotic act, as well as lots of other things, such as participating within the spirit and aspirations common to the nation, such as a voting behaviour. So far, we haven't actually covered anything which is actually totally dubious or scary or showing a form of prejudice against another group or another individual or another or whatever. What we're doing is we're showing that there is some key aspects of the definition of nationalism which most of us, especially if we are liberals or Democrats, could actually regard as being a good or positive thing so far. All right. Now let's have a quick look at the third definition, and this is where it moves from something which seems a little on the edge to some people to something which goes over the top. It's definition number 3 on dictionary.com's definition of nationalism. It says excessive patriotism, semicolon, chauvinism. Now chauvinism, which is defined again on dictionary.com, and this is quite interesting. It says zealous and aggressive patriotism or blind enthusiasm for military glory. That is actually quite a scary subject. So essentially, when it becomes extreme nationalism, it actually becomes very dubious. It becomes very difficult. It becomes scary. It becomes thoroughly inappropriate because essentially it becomes aggressive and blind in its enthusiasm for military glory, which essentially means killing people. So some of the neocons or some of the more extreme conservative movements, they would still come under the definition of patriotic or nationalistic groups. Okay? But their movement is more towards this extreme patriotism or this chauvinism. All right, so it's none of the warm, fluffy, positive ideas such we've had in number 1 and number 2. But when it gets on to number 3, then it goes on to something evil. Now, the second definition of chauvinism, it says biased devotion to any group, attitude, or cause, including religious chauvinism. So if you are just supporting the views of the gays, the straights, men, women, okay, I mean the extreme Marxist feminists definitely would come under the classification of being chauvinists in accordance with the definition we've got there. But not necessarily someone who is nationalistic. Someone who's nationalistic could be merely following the aspirations of their nation, which could in fact be a good home, a good life, warm hearth, that sort of thing. Okay. The third definition of chauvinism is the denigration or disparagement and patronization of either sex based upon the belief that one sex is inferior to the other and thus deserving of less than equal treatment or benefits, compared to male chauvinism according to dictionary.com. But that, of course, same sort of like partisan attitude could be applied to certain TV channels in the USA. That could be, it's essentially partisan way of thinking. If you come under the first and second definition of nationalism, you don't necessarily have that quality of extreme chauvinism. The next one is curious, because this one can be a bit 50-50, okay. Fourth definition of nationalism, according to dictionary.com. The desire for national advancement or political independence. Now, political independence movements can be quite good because that means you can actually have some kind of democratic control over, let's say, the lawmakers in your country, on the actual laws which are being put into effect within your nation, and is therefore quite a good thing. National advancement, I think we all want that. We all want to have the ability to have access to a public library or learning resource center. We all want to make sure we've got clean drinking water. We want to make sure that the sanitary system is working. We want to make sure that we have enough access to technology to be able to do what we want to, and for there to be enough jobs for people to actually get in employment and therefore not be a burden to society. So these desires for national advancement and political independence can in fact be very positive things. But the political independence aspects of it can in fact go the other way, as I'm sure you can tell if you've had a look at the Tea Party movement, or if you've had a look at other very strongly Europhobic groups here in the United Kingdom. They can go slightly potty, to be quite quite frank, they can lose the plots, they can become inappropriate, and they can spin into the more extreme chauvinistic attitudes that we have seen before. So number 4 can in fact be a little wishy-washy, but the positive aspects of number 4 are in fact very strong and resounding. Okay, just as the positives of definition 1 and 2 are also resounding. Number 3 essentially points out what could happen if either or any of these ideas go to extreme. And the final definition is another interesting one. The policy or doctrine of asserting the interests of one's own nation viewed as separate from the interests of other nations or the common interests of all nations. Well, that's a grey area, really. Because you have to have a certain level of focus upon your own nation, otherwise you cannot fulfill and ensure that the first, second, and fourth definitions of nationalism would be fulfilled if you were truly a nationalist in accordance with the definition on dictionary.com. Hopefully I haven't totally abused or used the no true Scotsman logical fallacy in that particular statement, but maybe I have. Please forgive me. But if you were to fulfill, I mean, let's say you were right now setting up a nationalist political party, would you focus on number 3, definition number 3, excessive patriotism and chauvinism? Or would you try and further the spirit and aspirations common to the whole nation? Or would you try and further the devotion and loyalty to one's own country, brackets patriotism, or sorry, semicolon patriotism? That would be okay. The desire for national advancements and political independence, fascinating, wonderful, very good, wonderful, good boy and girl, or girl, whatever. Number 5. Where do you draw the line in your thinking? I mean, what you could do, if you were fulfilling number 5, is to nuke every other nation on the face of the planet. So that would get rid of them. You then go over, steal their scarce resources, and then come back to your own country, and then, hey presto, your nation's doing very well. But that would be morally reprehensible, really, wouldn't it? Fortunately, in most of Western nations, the spirit and aspirations common to the whole nation has a certain level of compassion to it, so you wouldn't necessarily want to go out and blow to smithereens every other nation on the face of the planet. But if that wasn't present, then through some form of democratic enforcement, something bad could happen. So what I've done is I've just had a quick ramble, as I often do on this one particular wonderful YouTube channel, and I've gone through some ideas associated with nationalism. I don't see nationalism as a very bad concept. I would say that the positives of a certain level of national pride, a certain level of devotion and loyalty to one's own nation doesn't seem to be too negative. I would say that trying to encourage or work with the spirit and aspirations common to the whole nation could be a good thing. But I would also add a caveat, and that is that you would have to have enough strength to the opinion that the spirit and aspirations common to your nation are positive aspirations and are positive spirits and are positive goals and direction. And you can only have that through a combination of freedom of speech and something to positively explain why positive attitudes are somehow good and better. Something added to the nation. Something added to the political dialogue to enforce or to bring about or to encourage a way of thinking which has a certain level of compassion to the fellow man within your own nation and abroad. How that can happen is another issue. But essentially, I would say that maybe nationalism itself would be 60%. It's definitely more positive than negative. But there are these megalomaniacal, these excessive extremes which are present. These negatives within nationalism exist. All right? They are present in our society. And there are different definitions of nationalism depending upon which group of people you talk to, whether they are ethnic nationalism, whether it's racial nationalism, whether it is some other definition of imagined sense of identity that people have. Maybe there's even a pagan nationalism, maybe there's a Christian nationalism. Not geared towards the nation, but geared towards the imagined or dreamt of invention or conceptualization of what a nation is in their minds, or in the minds of the people who are part of those groups. I suppose that our responsibility and duty, knowing that these natural forces, these intellectual, spiritual, natural forces which are present and mentioned in this definition of nationalism do exist, would be to be a part of the dialogue and to make sure that people perceive or have the chance to understand the spirit and aspirations of the nation in a manner which is truly positive, compassionate, and beneficial to all. Thank you for listening. Good fortune and God bless. Bye for now.